Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for today's webinar, The Relative Benefits and Risks of Kratom Derived Products. Our presentation today, audio and visual capabilities will be turned off for attendees. We do certainly ask that you, if you have any questions, to ask those of our presenter. You can use the Q&A function on the Zoom toolbar at the bottom of your screen. You'll click Q&A, type your question, and hit send. We will address those questions as we have time at the end of the presentation. We are offering CME, Social Work CE, and McBAP credits for today's webinar. We will have a slide up at the end of the presentation with how to obtain those credits. We'll also put the information in the chat and send an email following the webinar today with that information. We do not have any disclosures to share with you. All righty, and without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our three presenters today, Dr. Michael White, Dr. Eliza Hutchinson, and advocate and retired business leader David Breger. Dr. White's research interests are in the areas of comparative effectiveness and preventing adverse events from drugs, devices, dietary supplements, and illicit substances. His approximately 500 publications have resulted in about 20,000 citations, an H index of 73, and an I-10 index of 278, placing him among an elite group of researchers. 5 of his publications were among the 5 most read articles in their respective journals during the years they were published. His work has been primarily funded by the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, with additional grants from the Donahue Foundation, Pfeiffer Foundation, and the American College of Clinical Pharmacy. His work has been published in JAMA, The Lancet, Annals of Internal Medicine, and Circulation, with research coverage by the NBC Nightly News, Good Morning America, BBC, CNN, The New York Times, The Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, Boston Globe, PBS NewsHour, WNPR Morning Edition, Prevention Magazine, The Dr. Oz Show, and hundreds of other national media outlets. His total media reach exceeds 3.2 billion people. That is amazing, Dr. White. Wow. He is a fellow of the American College of Clinical Pharmacologists and the American College of Clinical Pharmacy and the American Society of Health System Pharmacists. He is a contributing editor for the Annals of Pharmacotherapy and serves on the Pharmacy Practice News editorial board. Dr. White is a UConn Teaching Fellow, the university's highest teaching designation, and received the Provost Award for Public Engagement for his media, migrant farm worker clinic, and the COVID-19 work. He has received the American College of Clinical Pharmacy Young Investigator Award, the American Society of Health System Pharmacists Award for sustained contributions to the literature, ASHP Drug Therapy Research Awards, and the American Association of Colleges of Pharmacy Lyman Award and the Weaver Award. Thank you so much again, Dr. White, for being here. Next, Dr. Eliza Hutchinson is a board-certified family medicine physician and addiction medicine physician. She currently serves as an assistant professor of family medicine at the University of Michigan and medical director of addiction services at Packard Health, a federally qualified health center in Ann Arbor, Michigan. She is also an educator and clinical consultant for Open and the lead physician for the Open Warm Line, which is a telehealth bridge service for patients with opioid use disorder. Prior to living in Ann Arbor, Dr. Hutchinson provided primary and addiction care at a federally qualified health center in Seattle, Washington, and served as clinical site director of a low-barrier, community-based model for substance use disorder care. Dr. Hutchinson is a passionate advocate for expanding primary care-based addiction treatment rooted in harm reduction, improving the health of individuals affected by incarceration, and reducing stigma. Thanks so much, Dr. Hutchinson, for being with us. And finally, I'd like to introduce David Breger. David is a retired business and sales professional who is deeply committed to his family, especially his son Dan, whose tragic passing from a highly concentrated form of kratom profoundly changed his life. Originally from Philadelphia and raised in Cincinnati, David eventually settled in New Hampshire, where he raised his 2 sons. Motivated by this heartbreaking loss, he now champions stronger regulation of kratom in synthetic alkaloid isolates to help prevent similar tragedies and protect public safety. His tireless advocacy led to the passage of the landmark Daniel Breger Act, named in his son's memory, which was signed into law by the governor of Colorado in May 2025 and bans hazardous synthetic alkaloid products. Thank you so much, Dave, for joining us today. We really look forward to hearing your powerful story and all of the advocacy work that you've been doing. And without further ado, Dr. Hutchinson, I will turn it over to you for a brief overview of what's happening in the state of Michigan.
Great. Thanks so much, Sarah. Pleasure to be with you all. And I will take just a couple of moments to sort of center us on Michigan and then mostly get out of the way to hear from our wonderful expert guests. So thanks for being here. So today we're going to be talking about a topic that is obviously hot in the media and on many of our minds, and something that is moving really quickly from an uncommonly known set of substances to some that are really very pervasive in a lot of our communities. My guess is that most of you attending have probably experienced these products in some way, right? Whether you're seeing impacts on patients or clients, noticing the availability at the gas station or convenience store, maybe trying them yourself. And I really say products here because there's a wide variety out there, which tend to be all lumped under the umbrella term kratom. However, the risk profiles and clinical profiles of these are so different, and our speakers will really dive into some of that detail today. Kratom-derived products occupy a really complicated space, I think, as we all know. For some, they are a life-saving tool that allows them to manage their otherwise untreated pain, boost their mood, maybe avoid more dangerous opioids. But for others, it has caused immense harm in the form of addiction, seizures, liver injuries, or at worst, death. These products really don't fit neatly into any of the boxes we're accustomed to. They're not a conventional opioid. They're not just an herbal supplement. They're not an approved medication. And this complexity and the lack of federal regulation has led states and municipalities to attempt to address concerns really in a patchwork of policies across the country, really. So some states have banned all kratom-derived products. Others have drawn a distinction between the more potent synthetic forms versus the natural leaf product. Others have enacted age restrictions on the purchase of these products. Here in Michigan, currently all kratom-derived products are unregulated. So this means no restrictions on labeling, the location of sale, the age of purchase, and thus the ubiquitous presence that we see in our communities. Legislation is currently under consideration in the form of the House Bill 5537. This passed the House in March of this year and is now awaiting action in the Senate. And it would ban all kratom-derived products, so the natural leaf and all of the synthetic variants that you'll hear about today. Like any policy, there are potential benefits and unintended consequences of that legislation, and this is really vital for us to consider as a community of healthcare providers, social service providers. So that's why today's session is so important, and we are so fortunate to be joined by Dr. White and Dave to share their expertise and their stories. And our hope is that by the end of the webinar today, we will all feel better prepared to have informed conversations in our communities with family members, patients, clients, to recognize the potential risks, understand the benefits that some folks derive from these products, and help navigate the gap between what folks are using and what the evidence can really tell us currently.
And I only have about 30 minutes, maybe a minute or two more in order to be able to navigate it. So let's get right into it. The slides are going to have a lot more information than I'm going to have the ability to be able to cover, but I'll try to hit the high points and try to get home some of those important messages for you. And then you can always go back later, and if you want to look over the slides for some of that additional detail. But hopefully by the end of this program, you're going to be able to describe the different types of kratom-derived products, all those things under that umbrella of kratom that maybe you didn't know had existed. Starting with the natural leaf, then talking about the mitragynine extracts, and then the isolated synthetic products like 7-OH, mitragynine, pseudoindoxyl, and then the MGM alkaloids that are now out on the market. Compare and contrast the pharmacologic similarities and differences between kratom-derived products and how that relates to traditional opioids. I think we all have a pretty good understanding of what traditional opioids are, how is it similar, and how is it different. Describe the clinical trial data. There's not a lot of clinical trial data. That's very unfortunate, right? Based on the very strong internal validity associated with that type of data. There is a lot of descriptive data, and there's weaknesses associated with descriptive data, but we'll go through even with those limitations and talk about what is it that it is describing and how consistent is it in its description of those different kratom-derived products to determine some of the potential risks and benefits that it may be providing to society. And then finally, to describe a regulatory approach to reduce public health risk, but maintain access to natural leaf kratom products. So I am the chair of the Kratom Consumer Advisory Council, which is an independent board that's made up of a clinician scientist, that would be me, and then consumers who were either helped or hurt by kratom-derived products. And when you hear from Dave a little bit later, he's one of the members of our Kratom Consumer Advisory Council. The time that I spend leading the council and advocating for their position statements is reimbursed by the Global Kratom Coalition, which is a nonprofit advocacy organization. But the talk isn't supported by any outside group, and no one has control over the slide presentation. So let's go all the way back to 1831, when a Dutch botanist ends up going to Southeast Asia and finds people that are chewing the fresh leaves of this plant. And then he takes some samples of the leaves and comes up with the name for the plant, the mitragynine speciosa plant, and that is where kratom comes from. Now, it's thought that use had been going on there for generations before he ever went to Southeast Asia, but that's the first reported use of those products. In the United States, it was during the Vietnam War where the US government was very focused on stopping people from using cannabis products when they were serving overseas as veterans, but they didn't have very tight control over the use of opioid products that in their close proximity to where they're growing poppies, in that Southern Asia region, to having veterans that were coming back that were addicted to opioids. And some of them had, by integrating with local populations and discussions with local populations, stumbled upon kratom. There were also immigrants coming from Southeast Asia to the United States that were bringing leaf kratom with them, and they had used them locally. So there were small pockets of utilization, but utilization really didn't start to increase in the United States until the early 2000s. And that's because of the opioid epidemic. There were a lot of people that ended up becoming addicted to opioids, and they wanted to try to to find a substitute type product that would lead them to be able to get back to their job, be able to care for their families. And that was one of the potential promises associated with these leaf kratom products. There were also other people who had very severe pain syndromes. And when they started passing legislation and they brought the hammer down on prescribers and their ability to write prescriptions for opioids, in addition to removing a number of people that probably shouldn't have been having continued access to kratom or to opioid products at that dosing level, there were a number of other people that unfortunately ended up getting cut off by the healthcare system, that ended up being bedridden and had lost their ability to function due to their severe pain. And they were looking for potential options. So we've had about 25 years of leaf kratom human adverse event data. And there was a recently conducted FDA tolerability study that suggested that the risks, at least for single dose kratom, was generally mild. Mitragynine extracts ended up coming out more recently, but even more recently, some of the sellers started to spike their products with synthetic 7-hydroxymitragynine, or also known as 7-OH, or the mitragynine pseudoindoxyl. And then there were concentrated synthetic 7-OH products that made their debut in late 2023, really coming out and being sold in earnest later in 2024, that were sold under this banner of kratom. And then mitragynine pseudoindoxyl and this with or without 7-OH made their debut in late 2024, but in earnest in 2025, and was also sold as Kratom. And now we have this MGM-15 starting to be sold in the United States as of the fall of 2025. So let's start by talking about what national or international regulatory bodies are saying, right? So the World Health Organization in 2021 did review Kratom, looked at the potential to ban Kratom products, and they cited that there was strong potential for both benefits and risks, but it was unclear that there would be any public health enhancement from a ban. So they did not decide to ban those products. Pinney and Associates and then Concordia University College of Pharmacy both did independent 8-factor analyses of that data set, and they worried about the public health implications of a ban, potentially throwing people off who, are substituting Kratom for illicit opioids, and then causing people with severe pain to not be able to function. That they believed that the potential public health risk was greater than that of the benefit. In 2018, the DEA was considering what the status of Kratom should be. Should it be scheduled? Should it not be scheduled? And the Assistant Secretary of Health did send a letter to them and said that they didn't believe that natural leaf Kratom should be scheduled. And this is what they said. They said, that there's a potentially substantial risk to public health if these chemicals were scheduled at these times, primarily because Kratom users may switch to highly lethal opioids, risking thousands of deaths. And then the other thing is that the stigma that it would cause, driving it into, a black market, could inhibit patients from discussing Kratom use with their primary care physicians, leading to more harm, and then the enhancement of that stigma. So in summer of 2025, the FDA and the Department of Health and Human Services came out and clearly said that they believe that concentrated synthetic 7-OH products posed a significant public health risk, and they recommended that 7-OH be made a Schedule 1 product, so a federal ban on synthetic 7-OH products. But at the time, they did specifically say that this recommendation does not include the leaf Kratom products. On June 1st of this year, so only a few days ago, the NIH decided to do its own research of mitragynine, the main alkaloid inside the natural Kratom leaf, as a potential treatment for opioid use disorder. And what they were saying is that the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences and NIDA have funded, and the results have shown that in animal studies, it didn't raise significant safety concerns leading to this human investigation, right? So NIDA, the NIH, the FDA are all starting to do research in this area based on some of the potential promise that it could end up providing. So now we're going to talk about the preclinical data. And we can't talk about all the studies, but in general, when you look at the in vitro environment, what you see is that the main alkaloid that's in the natural Kratom leaf is mitragynine. It makes up between 50 and 66% of all the alkaloids that are inside that natural leaf. And it has a Ki value of 7,800. Now, the smaller the number, the more potent that is as an opioid, right? So if you look at fentanyl, they have a number somewhere around 1. Mitragynine is around 7,800. Now, there is a small amount of 7-OH or 7-hydroxymitragynine that is in the natural leaf, less than 2% of the total alkaloids. But here you see that 7-hydroxymitragynine has a Ki value of around 78, placing it in the same neighborhood as morphine and OxyContin. So you could see that if you had taken the mitragynine, which they have done, and you chemically force its conversion into 7-hydroxymitragynine, and you sell a product that has 96% 7-hydroxymitragynine or 50 or 60% 7-hydroxymitragynine, that you're dramatically increasing the opioid potency of that product versus the natural leaf. They've also made chemical conversions where they've created mitragynine pseudoindoxyl, and they've now created these MGM alkaloids. And you can see that there are lower Ki values that are associated with those other products. So the take-home message is that the natural leaf is mostly made up of mitragynine, which does have some weak opioid effects, but that the opioid effects that are associated with the synthetic products are much more aligned with traditional opioid products. So while we talk about mitragynine because it is the most abundant, don't think that it's the only one that's in natural leaf or that it's only mitragynine and 7-hydroxymitragynine. There are a lot of alkaloids that are in those whole leaf kratom products, and they do a variety of things all around the body. Now, one of the things that they do is opioid stimulation, but there are some alkaloids that are also blocking some opioid receptors. They're also providing alpha adrenoceptor stimulation, right? Giving you effects that may be more akin to what you would see with something like clonidine. There is some serotonin boosting. There's some anti-inflammatory effects. There's some muscle relaxing effects. But I want you to compare that whole leaf kratom alkaloid milieu with what you're getting from the synthetic alkaloids, where you're just getting the mu opioid receptor effects of those products, right? So you're not only getting mu opioid receptor potency that is around 100 times more potent than that of mitragynine, but it's not being balanced out with any of these other potential effects. So when you look at the natural leaf kratom products, the benefits for a variety of different issues are based on the convergence of all these alkaloids competing with each other or against each other when you take those products. So not unlike some cannabis type products with CBD versus THC, and then the other cannabinoids and the other terpenes that are in that product. So here's a rat study. There's a number of rat studies that are like this, but this one I thought was particularly good because it looked at 7-OH and it looked at mitragynine along with morphine, and they did a comparison. So they took rats and they got them addicted to morphine. And after the rats were addicted to morphine, they switched them to either mitragynine or 7-OH for a period of time. And the rats readily preferred 7-OH to mitragynine, but if they weren't given a choice and they only had one or the other, after that period of time where they were on these substitute therapies, when they were given morphine again, they saw that the rats that were using mitragynine used lower doses of morphine once it was reintroduced, while the rats that were using 7-OH needed higher morphine doses once it was introduced, right? So they think that that is a reinforcing effect, and that is one of the markers of an addictive product. So, they ended up concluding that the present findings indicate that mitragynine does not have abuse potential and reduces morphine intake, whereas 7-hydroxymitragynine should be considered a kratom constituent with high abuse potential that may also increase the intake of opioids. So here is a study looking at mitragynine in alcohol-addicted rodents. So we all know that naltrexone is an established drug therapy for alcohol use disorder, but that its effects are mild to modest and that it doesn't work for everyone. So in this study, they looked at the impact of mitragynine, they looked at the impact of naltrexone, and the combination of those two in this alcohol use disorder, how many times they're pressing the lever in order to be able to get alcohol. And what they ended up showing was that each of those therapies by themselves did have some effectiveness, but that it was the combination of the two together that were more effective than either of those products alone. Right, so there's potential promise for the natural leaf kratom product, for mitragynine as one of the alkaloids from natural leaf kratom to help people who have alcohol use disorder. This study is looking at respiration. And what was particularly good about this study, and there were a couple of others that we'll mention in just a minute, but they were only looking at respiratory rate. But here they were looking at respiratory rate in animals, tidal volume in animals, and then the product of those two, the minute ventilation. And what you can see is that the effects of 7-OH, both at a lower dose and a higher dose, were similar to a lower and a higher dose of morphine, but that the effects of mitragynine at two different doses uh, was not showing negative effects on respiration. There's another study, and so here is the reference for that showed the exact same thing, but only looking at respiratory rate. And there have been another study that looked specifically just at mitragynine versus regular opioids that found that there were no negative effects on breathing associated with mitragynine therapy. So now let's move on to the best quality data that we currently have, the placebo-controlled clinical trial. And then we start out looking at kratom as a pain reliever. So what they did in this study is they had people that they came in and they had them put their hands in an ice bath to see how long they could keep it there before they had to withdraw it due to the pain. And then afterwards, they ended up giving them either kratom or placebo. They had them stick their arms back in the ice bath again. And what you see is that 1 hour after they had used kratom, that there was a doubling of the amount of time that they could keep their arm in the ice bath before they had to remove it, while there was no positive impact when they had received placebo. No withdrawals, and therapy was well tolerated. So this is the FDA study I was telling you about before. And then you can see that they had 40 people, 30 people ended up getting kratom across a wide range of doses, or they ended up receiving placebo. And then here is the alkaloid content, where you see that mitragynine is the main alkaloid. You can see that the 7-hydroxymitragynine level is below the level of quantitation. And this is the dosing strategy that they used. They started with the 1 gram of natural leaf kratom, and they went all the way up to 12 grams. So the usual ingestion dose is in that 1 to 3 gram level, but there are some people that do push their dose and end up with dosing in that 12 gram range. What they saw was that there were no severe adverse events that were noted, even at the higher doses. And you can see that all the way over in the table with the pooled placebo versus the pooled kratom effects. And then they had also down below looked at other adverse effects, and you can see that vomiting was one that was occurring in the kratom group, but was not occurring in the placebo group, and that it seems to be occurring at doses between 8 and 12 grams, where it wasn't seen at lower doses. They looked at a number of different potential markers of addiction, right? And then these were two that I wanted to point out to you. The others really didn't show anything. One was pupil constriction. The amount of pupil constriction was less than 50% of what would be expected when you use traditionally dosed opioids, showing again a mild level of opioid effect, not a potent opioid effect. Right? Even at very high doses, much less potent opioid effects. So they looked at 4 different tests that were markers of addiction potential, and at doses up to 8 grams, they didn't show anything. But when they looked at the 12-gram dose, you can see that for people reporting that they were feeling high or feeling euphoric, or people that suggested that they were feeling drunk from the use of the product, that there was this bump in that green line that you see at around 12 grams. Even with this information, the FDA said that they were not concerned about the addiction marker results, but that more study was needed. And the FDA is now conducting a study specifically looking at the addiction potential of natural leaf kratom. So that is going to be ongoing, and hopefully we'll have the results in a couple of years. Here is a multi-dose safety study. So this population was larger, up to 104 volunteers, and you can see that it does something really important. It looked at single-day doses, but then it also looked at 15 days of continuous therapy and a multi-dose schema. One of the things that you see is that as you had higher doses, that there was this dose-related increase in terms of the people that had any potential adverse effect that was being reported, right? But that only at the highest dose was it something that was greater in the single dose, right, than what you had seen with placebo, but that it wasn't a significantly significant finding when you put in the standard deviations and you did those comparisons. And then when you looked at multiple daily dose, it was the same type of thing. They also looked at the severity of those adverse events, right? When you see P with the SD, that is single dose placebo, and then PMD is multi-dose placebo, and then how it's related to the dose escalation from the single dose 1, which was the lowest dose, up to the single dose 4, or the multi-dose 1 to multi-dose 4, going up in dosing, and that the effects are generally mild and then some moderate. Very little was severe. So that's a clinical trial data. It would be fabulous if we had more robust data with longer timeframes to be able to do that. And the FDA is proposing to do that kind of study. And the NIH study series will end up getting to that point also down the road, but we don't have that data now. We do have this descriptive study. Remember, descriptive studies have a number of different potential limitations that are associated with them, because it's just looking anecdotally at the different experiences that people are reporting, right? But it is the best quality data that we do have in large data sets. And so we present it just understanding that there's limitations in that data set. So pain is the most common reason that people in this 7,600 person survey said that they were using these leaf kratom products. Many people had prescription or illicit drug dependency. And that in this study, pain was reduced in 85% of kratom users, and opioid use was reduced or stopped in 49% of these kratom users. Now, there is one study that had 961 people, so a lot smaller of a population, that showed a more robust effect, with about 80% of people being able to stop or reduce their opioid use for greater than 1 year. Okay. And what you're going to see as we go through is that there is some variability in terms of the magnitude of effects that we're going to be talking about, but the directionality of those effects are very consistent. And that's one of the things that systematic reviewers and other people would look at when you're rating the strength of the overall evidence base, right, as you're going through. So here's 3 different studies. I want to focus you on the bottom 2 of those 3 studies, in that they looked at people who had high risks of contracting HIV due to their behavior, such as injecting illicit drugs, sharing needles, and then having, sexual encounters that were unprotected. And what they saw in these 2 different studies was that when people who were using their illicit drugs ended up switching over to using kratom, that there was a reduction in the people's injection of illicit drugs, of sharing needles, of sharing syringes, right, which could reduce people's risk not only of HIV, but also things like hepatitis B and C. And of course, when you're not injecting drugs, also bacterial infections, blood infections, and sepsis. So here is a study that is descriptive in nature, so not as strong as the randomized control trial you saw before, but they were looking at people who were self-managing pain. And what they saw was that it was something that people were saying was effective in helping them lower their overall pain levels. And the effect was more pronounced with people who ended up experiencing chronic pain. So this study I'm going to show over the course of the next few slides. So remember, when we go from slide to slide, it's going to be based on the same type of study. And this one I thought was a really good one, and it was funded by NIDA. 357 participants, and they looked at different doses. A had the highest kratom dosing. E had the lowest, right? And why were they using kratom? Well, one of the main reasons was because they believed that kratom was safer than other substances. And a lot of people who were in this study were using different substances, not just opioids, not just alcohol, but a number of other illicit substances also. You can look at the number of people who were looking to use this drug for long-term substitute of opioids, and that there was an appreciable number of people that were looking at a long-term substitution for alcohol when they were using their kratom products. But that most of the people were there to try to relieve either short or long-term pain. So how good was it? 80 to 90% of people found that kratom was effective for the main purpose that they had chosen. 70 to 80% of people found that kratom helped them with their activities of daily living, but less than 5% found it a hindrance to their daily living. So broken down like this, you can see that on the good side, 88% of participants found that kratom was a real benefit, was helpful, or was therapeutic. 63% said that it was life-saving for them. But 17% did say it was addictive. 4% said that use was problematic, and 3% of people felt that use was a burden. So there are some people whose lives are not better when they're using kratom-derived products. They actually believe that it is worse. So among the people who were in the kratom study who met the criteria for a kratom use disorder, they ended up looking at the different components of kratom use disorder. And I think that this is really important for people to understand. Can you meet the definition of addiction, right? And does that designation mean the same thing to all different people? Is it the same as having a heroin use disorder or having another opioid use disorder? And what I want to show you is when you look at certain things like cravings or withdrawal, right? That there's a number of people with kratom use disorders that are checking those boxes in that diagnosis, but there's very few people who are using despite hazardous situations, who are giving up their other activities, where it interfered with their obligations, where they're using it despite it causing social problems, that there's spending excessive time using it or recovering, or that they use it despite physical or psychological problems that were being caused by the use of kratom. So if we look at it as a dichotomous variable, did somebody meet the criteria for addiction or no? That tells a different picture than what would it mean if you had this type of addiction versus another type of addiction. But I will say that even when we're looking at this and we say in general, this is what we're looking at, 5% of people did say that use was causing physical or psychological issues, and that they were spending excessive time using the products, and that some people did report social problems, impairment of obligations and activities, and use despite hazardous activities, right? So there are some people that are harmed using natural leaf kratom products. So this is a descriptive study, and what I just wanted to show was that in overall adverse effects, most of it is nausea and vomiting, some constipation, some people feeling anxious and jittery, some trouble sleeping, right? But there was 3.9% that had either addiction or felt they developed dependence, and that there was 3.1% of people that ended up reporting that they had nystagmus, which is wobbly eye movements. So here's another study just showing the same type of thing, where 54% of people in this study said that kratom effects are compatible with and help me meet my daily obligations. But look at this. There's 3% of people that said it is not compatible with my daily obligations, and they sometimes undermine my ability to meet those daily obligations, right? And then another 4% said that they are not compatible with my daily obligations. This study is also going through the different components of a kratom use disorder, and it's showing the same thing as we showed before, right? That the tolerance, the withdrawal, and the cravings are by and large there, but some of the other aspects are not there to the same extent, right? And that overall, 66% had mild substance use disorder symptoms, that 20% had moderate, but there was 13.9% of people who had a kratom use disorder. So in that subgroup, that did say that their things were severe. So this just shows comparatively, if people were using heroin, were using cocaine, were using alcohol, right? So you're looking at black, the dark green, and then the gray versus that very light green for kratom, what a substitution could mean in terms of things like your ability to fulfill social obligations, social problems, reducing activities of daily living, using in an unsafe way, and then use despite problems, right? So that light green line for kratom is certainly not zero, but you could see that if people had alcohol use disorder, people had heroin use disorder or cocaine use disorder, that if they were able to successfully treat with kratom, that there's the potential for this reduction in risk. Now, this is an amalgam of many different types of data put together here on the same slide. It's not from a randomized controlled trial, right? So it has limitations. Now let's talk about 7-OH products. Concentrated synthetic 7-OH products are not natural leaf kratom products. So this is from the National Drug Early Warning System. And their exact words are up here in the top and then the bottom right. But as you go through and you read, what they're saying is that the effects are like OxyContin and hydrocodone. They're unlike the natural leaf. That gas station accessibility is a concern for impulse control, that rapid tolerance leads to dose escalation and financial strain, and that people were concerned about respiratory depression, right? So here is a group called Kratom Quitters, and then the founders of Kratom Quitters ended up having these quotes, right? Since 7-OH hit the scene, our membership just increased at a rate we were having a really hard time keeping up with. It's become a full-time job, right? Nearly all the people that are joining us are 7-OH users. I can't remember a person joining our community that's just powder only. It's been months since I can say that. So they're not saying that they didn't have people that were part of Kratom Quitters before, and that natural leaf didn't cause some problem. It's just that the magnitude of problem has been magnified intensely since these 7-OH products have come out on the market. So here's the Foundry Front Range Detox Center in Colorado. The biggest change in kratom withdrawal severity is not happening at the leaf level. It's happening with concentrated extract products that isolate 7-OH. These products have become widely available at gas stations, smoke shops, and online over the past 2 years. The clinical picture they produce is meaningfully different than traditional kratom powder. Right. And then this group, Quitting 7-OH, which is a Reddit post, they have 1.1 million views and 2,000 members. So there have been some cases of respiratory arrest. So here is one of the case reports of someone who had use for alcohol, but also used kratom. But when they gave the person naloxone, the person had come right back suggesting that it was the 7-OH as the driver, where maybe there was a contribution for alcohol, but that it wasn't the main driver of that case. There have been deaths that have been reported to 7-OH. Sometimes it's hard because you don't have all the details in order to directly attribute the level of causality in all those individual cases. But here we have a father of two and a husband who went to the gas station, saw a product that promised energy. So there's the product down below, watermelon flavored 7-OH. So the person bought it, had used it a few times, and ended up getting addicted. And so this is what I was telling you about before when you're looking at quick development of the loss of effect, and then you need to escalate the dose in order to get the same effect. That the person was spending $100 to $200 on 70 different occasions over a 2-month period of time to buy these tablets. The person couldn't function, and with the straining of their family finances, the father ended up committing suicide with a gun. So here are poison control data calls, and you can see that when Kratom use was just getting started in the early 2015, 16, and 17, that there were some increases in the number of calls to poison control centers, but that ended up leveling off around 2018 and was relatively stable at least until 2023 when they had that established leaf use. And then in 2024, when people were starting to spike products with 7-OH, or people were starting to create those synthetic 7-OH products themselves, there was an increase that ended up exploding in 2025. So these are the things that people are complaining about when they're calling poison control centers for 7-OH: trouble breathing, seizures, agitation, confusion, rapid heart rate, increases in blood pressure, sedation, including loss of consciousness, nausea and vomiting, and sweating. This is EMS calls for all Kratom derived products, and you can see a sharp increase that had occurred since those 7-OH products were released. If we went back before January of 2023, they were relatively stable. So here we have products that not only are much more potent as opioids, but they started to become sweetened. They started to have fruit flavorings and scents. They started to have names like Blue Raz, Opia, Perks, Rave, and Smurfs, which either underestimated their risk or promised people a traditional opioid-like experience. Ice cream cone type formulations, candy bars, taffy, lollipops, bright coloring, buccal pouches, sublingual strips, vaping products that bypass the liver and get much higher peak effects that could increase the level of euphoria. So here's a child at a daycare, comes across a product that looks like candy, that smells like candy. The child takes the product and ended up needing to be revived as a result. Here's just what some of the products end up looking like, including this ice cream cone that's here. And these ice cream cones are supposed to be 6 servings. So you're only supposed to eat 1/3 of that cone. And then look here at the bottom, a product that is Smurfs, right? And looks like candy. So how do you thread the needle between safety and access? Well, one of the things that the Kratom Consumer Advisory Council has been working on is some of these position statements. Isolated concentrated synthetic products should be banned. If you wouldn't sell Blue Raz flavored morphine in a gas station, you shouldn't be selling this. So what kind of things, if you come up with that ban, could you be doing with natural leaf kratom if you didn't want a blanket ban, where you may be denying the serious pain patients and patients who are substituting illicit opioids for kratom to be able to not have legal options? The regulations that we believe would be effective would be this: a pre-registration of products with uploaded packaging and certificates of analysis to make sure the products don't have too many heavy metals, they don't have microbial contamination, and that they're not spiked with 7-OH. You have to be 21 or older to purchase. No candy formulations, no names that would appeal to children or users of substances of abuse, no non-swallowed formulations, no vapes, no sublinguals, no buccals, no transdermals, no injected. No products sold, or products should only be sold from behind the counter, right? So they're not sitting right there next to the Mentos and then tempting the people who are coming in to buy it. Proper labeling for serving sizes and risks. So if you have a little shot and it's supposed to be 3 doses, but it looks like you're just supposed to drink the entire bottle, you would need to have a dosing syringe or a dosing spoon that came along with it that identified what a proper dose would be. And then there has to be enforcement of those regulations with fines and product seizures in order to be able to make that effective. So thank you. And now I'm going to turn it over to David Breger to take it home.
Thank you, Dr. White. I've seen that quite a few times, but I learn something new every time, and it's eye-opening. I'm here today to talk a little bit about the personal aspect of this. This is my son, Daniel. I'd rather not be here today. I'd rather not be in any of these kinds of sessions, but it's become kind of my life's work for the past 3 years, and I'm proud to be doing it in his memory. I lost my son, Dan. He was 33 years old in on August 29th of 2021. Dan at the time was living in Colorado. He worked at DaVita, as headquartered in downtown Colorado. He was climbing the corporate ladder. He was on two tennis leagues, playing tennis regularly. He worked out 4 or 5 times a week. He biked 20 miles a day. He was a avid fisherman and hiker and skier. His brother lived up in Vail, and they skied together often. He was just a very vibrant person, and he was a great person. Had a lot of great things going on in his life, but he was challenged with alcohol, and he was also challenged with depression and anxiety. The most of which really was anxiety, and he was constantly looking for ways to deal with it. And unfortunately, Dan died, uh, as I said, August 29th. We did not find out how he died until a couple of days before Thanksgiving, almost 3 months, because we were at the time in COVID, and the police reports were almost non-existent. They didn't take pictures like they normally would. The coroner's offices were all backed up. So it was just very hard to get information. And when we finally did, and I saw that the cause of death, it was a combination of mitragynine, and I never pronounce that right. Doctor cringes every time I do that. But
Diphenhydramine.
yeah, there we go. There we go. A combination of that and the active ingredient in Benadryl, which I believe was in a sleep aid that he was taking. And there does seem to be some correlation with those two products, anecdotally anyway. I've personally come across probably a half dozen to a dozen deaths with just those two substances. So they do seem to have a negative interaction to them. But the real problem was that Dan had taken, we didn't find this out until almost 2 years later, actually, when we were able to finally get into one of his computers. We stumbled across a password into his main computer and found out that he had only bought the concentrated version of Kratom one time, about 2.5 weeks before he died, and he bought two little jars that had no dosing instructions on the jars, but on their website, it was supposed to be 10 doses per jar. So we believe he took one or maybe even both of those. And at the time, the American Kratom Association had on their website signs of overdose, and they included things like you would become disoriented, you could start to hallucinate, you could begin vomiting, and you could pass out. And if you're experiencing any of those things, call 911. So exactly when was Dan supposed to call 911? When he was hallucinating, when he was passing out, when he was throwing up. And they left out the worst one of all, which is death. He ceased to breathe, like many overdose situations. That's ultimately what killed him. Unfortunately, his brother took the call from the coroner's office on a Monday morning. He had died Sunday morning, but wasn't found until late that day in his apartment. His brother took the call because his brother was emergency contact because he used to live locally, but he had just moved back to the East Coast. I'm in New Hampshire, and he had just moved back 6 weeks before Dan passed. And so Jeff lost not only his brother, but literally his best friend. They were 8 days shy of 2 years apart. They were as close as two people could get. And so it was just devastating in so many ways. And then to find out that it was a product that with regulation that this could have been avoided. And when I first started down this road, I was extremely naive, as most people are. I was drinking from a fire hose of information about kratom. But one of the first things I did was I looked it up, and I did the search at the time. And again, this is in 2021. I searched what are the benefits of kratom. And if you did a Google search like that back then, you'd want to start taking it yourself. I mean, it solved every problem known to man, according to a lot of things that you would read. But what jumped out at me when I did that search was that the very first one was anxiety. And we knew immediately that's why Dan was taking it. He had been taking some other substance for anxiety that was supposedly all natural. I had done some research and kind of raised some concerns about long-term use of it with him. But his brother had just been with him just before he moved out here. He spent 3 nights with him before he moved out 6 weeks earlier, and he never mentioned using kratom. So that tells us that he definitely was not. They just shared everything with each other. So it wasn't until like 3 or 4 weeks later that he bought those first doses and then had the fatal dose taken. But so when I decided that, well, first of all, the first 2 years I was pretty much non-functional. Um, I was extremely depressed. I would say I was suicidal to some degree. I think the thing that really kept me going was my other son more than anything. Very, very tough on the marriage. Very sad statistic when you lose a child. Um, 80% of people get divorced after losing a child. It's 80%. It's a very high number. So it was very difficult. You go through the grieving process in very different ways. My wife was very much into the afterlife type of things. I was not. But ultimately, after 2 years, literally just barely functioning, I decided it was really through a set of coincidences. I went to see. I live in New Hampshire, so obviously, come presidential election time, it's a hotbed of politicians coming up here, and I went to see to see a national politician at one of his town halls. And at the end of the town hall, I was interviewed by the Washington Post, and just so happened that this young Washington Post writer started to ask me questions. She said, "Hey, I'm going to use your stuff tomorrow. I need some personal information from you." And she started asking me questions, and she said, "Oh, you're retired. You seem young." And I said, "Yeah, I was fortunate, but not so fortunate. My wife and I had just retired together 6 or 7 weeks before Dan died. So we went from the highest high to the lowest low." And I shared this with her, and she asked me, "Well, how did your son die?" And I said, "I really probably have never heard of it, but it's from kratom." She goes, "I know all about kratom. I'm from Florida." And the first couple of winters after Dan passed, we spent about a month in Florida, and I couldn't drive down the street without breaking out in tears because kratom signs were everywhere. There were kratom bars. Kratom is sold at every street corner, and it was just haunting. It was just absolutely haunting. But so ultimately, the getting back to the writer for the Washington Post, she said it's really ironic because one of my fellow writers right now is doing a story on kratom, and I'd like to hook you two up. And I said, by all means. So I started converting with this writer from the Washington Post, and ultimately got Dan's story told in that Washington Post article. And that was really a turning point for me. It told me that I could really make a difference and sharing Dan's story out there. And so I started looking at a lot of different ways to do it. And at first, I was like gun ho. I still have a website up. It's called kratomkills.com. Kratomkills.com was a kind of a knee-jerk reaction to me at the time. I really wanted all kratom banned. I thought it was just something that should be wiped off the face of this earth. But the more I got into it and the more work that I did, I realized that there were an awful lot of people that were using kratom. You hear a lot of different numbers, but most of them seem to land somewhere in the 20 million range. Doctor, would you agree with that number, in the 20 million range?
Hard to know, but it definitely is in the millions.
Yeah. So, it is hard. There's a lot of different ways of doing it, but so you immediately think, okay, if there's that many people that are using it. And then I started meeting these I testified out in California for some laws that actually didn't go through. And when I was testifying out in Colorado, I was meeting all these people that were showing up that were using leaf-based kratom and that had very positive changes in their life. Many of them were PSTD patients who were able to lead a much more normal life with very mild doses of kratom leaf. Others were terminally ill patients and people with chronic pain disorders. And they all were using it very successfully, and they were using it very responsibly. They were not overusing it. And it really made me think about, well, gee, if this stuff is banned, where are these 10 or 20 million people going to go? And what are they going to do? And what in my opinion would happen is that there would be a black market to fill the void, and it would be worse than there's a wild west going on right now in the kratom industry, but it would be even worse if it were purely a black market situation. So I became more of an advocate for regulation. And through the help of the Global Kratom Coalition and Dr. White, he and I both testified together numerous times, including several times in Colorado, where we were successfully getting we were successful in getting the Daniel Breger Act passed, which was landmark legislation. It's still not as tight as I would like to see it, or as broadband as I'd like to see it, but it's certainly a step in the right direction. There is some federal legislation that's pending right now on 7-OH that may or may not eliminate, or not eliminate, but carve out a safe area for leaf-based kratom, but that's yet to be determined. But that's pending right now. The FDA has recommended emergency scheduling. But so as I got involved, and then right around the time that I got the Daniel Breger Act passed, the 7-OH started appearing out there, and it really, really scared me to see what it was all about. And I actually tried it. I got a one dose, and I tried a quarter of what they said a dose was. And I said to my wife, I told her I was going to try it. I wanted to see what the stuff was all about. And I said, just keep an eye on me, but I'm taking a very small amount. And about 40 minutes later, I turned to her and I said, I feel like I took a Vicodin. And that was a very, very small portion of a dose. And the reason I knew is because I had taken Vicodin like 6 months before for a wisdom tooth or not a wisdom tooth, but a root canal. I was having to get a root canal that I had to wait 5 days to get it over a long holiday weekend. But so it really scared me, and I became very active in that particular space. Got involved with Stop Gas Station Heroin, and started going after some of the people who are manufacturing this product. I actually led a protest at the American Kratom Association, who have since flipped, but at the time were still supporting 7-OH as a viable kratom alternative, or as an actual kratom product, which I think you can realize now, as Dr. White has gone through this, that it really is not a kratom product. It's purely a man-made opioid. And it's just amazing that something that powerful can be sold at every street corner. Um, but it's been a long battle, and at one point I actually led a protest out in Kansas City against a company called American Shaman, and they're in the headlights right now with the FDA. They're one of four different manufacturers that are in the headlights because of their manufacturing of 7-OH. Lots of their product has been pulled off the shelves, and they have been raided twice, but still not shut down as of yet. Hopefully, what's going to happen? And during the course of that protest that I led, the CEO of the company actually came out and offered samples to all the protesters at one point. I mean, it was just appalling. And A guy that we work with too also did a little documentary, and he went around to many of the shops in the Kansas City area that were under this American Shaman banner. And in shop after shop, they were offering him samples. So, the 7-OH addiction that's taking place out there, it's in my opinion, there's two things happening amongst many, but one is that word travels very quickly in the drug community, and people using opioids discovered that they can go get a somewhat more controlled opioid at their local corner store or vape shop, as opposed to going to the park and buying a $10 or $20 pill that may or may not be laced with fentanyl or who knows what. So that word spread very, very quickly, and clinicians have seen it in their uptake. The other are people that unwittingly get addicted to it, and I've heard a lot of stories about people that were using leaf-based kratom safely and were going in to buy their regular leaf-based product, and they were upsold to 7-OH, saying, "Oh, this is even better. This stuff is great." And they get addicted to it very quickly, and their life spirals out of control very rapidly. And these are people that were safely using a leaf-based product. So, it's a unique space that I'm in. There's not a lot of parents who have lost a child to kratom that are advocating for regulation as opposed to banning. But I just think it's a better way to go. I think it makes more sense. There's a lot of people, as I said, it was a concentrated extract that killed my son. If the regulations that were in place in Colorado were in place when he bought his product, still be alive today. And that's what I'm continuing to try and do with my efforts is to save lives. I'm actually going to be on 60, going down to get interviewed by 60 Minutes next week, and I'm going to be a panel of one uh, of four parents that have lost a child, talking about the loss of their child to kratom. But I believe I'll probably be the only one there that's advocating for regulation as opposed to banning. But again, with all the work that I've done and the people that I've met and the things that I've seen, I think it's a safer way to go than an outright ban. Prohibitions just don't ever work, in my opinion, on anything. And I think it's a much more logical space. But with that, I'll wrap it up, and open it up for any questions. I appreciate you hearing Dan's story today, and please spread the word about the safety of kratom.
Awesome. Dave, thank you so much for being here with us and being willing to share Dan's story and all of the work that you're doing, and just really sharing kind of how your thought process has sort of changed over time, and where you see things today. And I look forward to seeing you on 60 Minutes.
Thank
That
you.
will be awesome. I know we don't have a lot of time for questions today, so Dr. White, I don't know if you had any additional closing remarks that you wanted to share at all. Otherwise, I'll kind of we'll wrap it up after this.
Yeah, so we did get several people that did send in questions. We have answers to all of the questions that people sent in before. If you type your questions into the chat, even if we can't get to it, we'll put answers together, and then we'll send out those answers for you, right? So if you
Yeah.
have any questions, you can do that, or you could always reach out to me directly. You could reach out to Dave directly, and then we'll give you what our opinion is as to what we can do. So some of the questions were, what happens if you're a pregnant woman and you're using it, and after the child's born, the child can have opioid withdrawal, just like if you were using regular opioids. Usually it is less potent, right? But it can be something where you could need, traditional therapy, where you put them on a morphine drip, and then you slowly decrease their morphine dose, and, to try to get them off of it. But any other questions you have, we're happy to entertain any of those questions. Maybe we have a good answer, maybe we don't, but we're happy to share what it is that we do know.
Wonderful. Awesome. Thank you so much. Yes. And thanks, Dr. Hutchinson, as well, for sharing kind of what's happening in our state, because I'm sure, as many of you know, every day there's something else. And Dr. Hutchinson, you're very involved in local news as well around here, and articles and all that. So it's great to have each of you with us today. So thank you so much, everybody on the other side of the screen. We will go ahead and conclude. Again, the recording will be available in about a week, and then please watch your email for CE information and get in contact with Open if you, for some reason, don't receive it, so we can help you out. Thank you again, and everyone take care.